Well, welcome. I'm Dan Turner. I'm head of programming and outreach for the Georgetown County Library, and it's great to see you all here. And this is another great opportunity to celebrate what's going on. Started this weekend on Saturday, October 7th, and it'll be here through mid-December, December 15th, and that's the Justice for All South Carolina and the American Civil Rights exhibit that's going on here. It'll be on public display right out in the lobby area here at Southern Georgetown Community Library. So we want to say thanks to our librarian, our branch manager, Cherie Drayton, who's done a wonderful job hosting this exhibit, setting it up, getting the word out. And of course, our friends here, our friends group, the Friends of the Southern Georgetown Community Library. And I love their shirts. And you can identify them with their shirts, but they've done a great job supporting this as well. And we want to say thank you to our library director, Dwight McInvell, who helped bring in this exhibit and was kind of foundational in helping put it together, along with Dr. Bobby Donaldson, director of the Center for Civil Rights History and Research at the University of South Carolina, and that's where this exhibit comes from. So we're grateful for their input and help with all this. And our assistant director, Trudy Bazemore, is here as well. And she's been instrumental and very helpful in putting this exhibit together and also in helping us plan programs. So we have some programs going on to help just illuminate and educate folks, hello, come on in, on the exhibit, aspects of the exhibit to help it come alive. It is an impressive exhibit once you see it. And it has a local dimension too, all about Georgetown County, not just South Carolina, but right here. But we want to have some talks, 4 presentations while that exhibit is here to help really bring it to life. And we're starting today with a great one from Steve Williams. So hitting off with we've got a great leadoff hitter here. But I'm going to pass a couple of other things around here. You can have a look at these items, because they're going on as well. One is Talking History. This is in conjunction with Coastal Carolina University's Department of History. But tomorrow evening at 6 p.m., this is up at our Waccamaw Library branch in Litchfield. We'll have Dr. Madison Cates talking about uncovering the history of the long Black freedom struggle at Hobcaw Barony. So it's another kind of local talk about the freedom struggle in this area. And then our next Justice for All presentation will be Claudia Smith-Brinson, who wrote a book, Stories of Struggle, The Clash Over Civil Rights in South Carolina. She interviewed over 150 elders, 150 folks who were part of that struggle to get the story down before it disappeared. So that was very important. And we'll get to hear from her on October 25th, so 2 weeks from today. But before that, as I said, we got a great leadoff hitter. This, if you don't know somehow, this is Steve Williams, who, we could go on and talk about Steve for a long time. Well, I'll try to keep it short, this intro, but we are very grateful to him for being a part of this. He's kind of our go-to guy as a local historian, an award-winning columnist, and prolific author. I mentioned a couple of titles that he's written, but how many books have you published now, Steve? 10. So yeah, we'll limit it to 2 unless he may mention some others, but you may have copies of these. Ebony Effects, 150 Unknown Facts About Blacks in Georgetown, South Carolina. And that's a book that's been reprinted multiple times. And as I travel along the story of Harriet Tubman and James Boley, which has a lot of resonance here in Georgetown County. James Boley rescued by Harriet Tubman, and he would come back here and become a school superintendent, a lawyer, a judge, newspaper owner, congressman right here in Georgetown. So, big deal, and Steve has written about all about that issue. So, and Steve, along with Marilyn Hemingway, was instrumental in bringing the wonderful sculptor Harriet Tubman Journey to Freedom right here to Georgetown. It'll be at Georgetown's Rainey Park, Joseph A. Rainey Park, 929 Front Street. You can go by and see it. It's on public display until the end of this month, so till the end of October. But Steve was right in the thick of things, advocating to get that wonderful sculpture here in Georgetown County. So Steve has done, he's done so much. He's written so many books. He's dug into so many treasures of Georgetown County history and the deep, rich African-American heritage that I think it's time we label Steve himself a treasure, because he's unearthed so many other treasures. So we really appreciate Steve doing this for us and educating us and bringing this alive. And we want to say thank you to South Carolina Humanities, a not-for-profit organization that inspires, engages, and enriches South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. Democracy demands wisdom is its catchphrase now, and they're helping to support this program, and we'll get a lot of wisdom today from Steve Williams. So let's welcome in Steve.
Thank you so much. Words can hardly symbolize how honored I am to be here. I like the way Dr. Dan or Dr. Turner called me the leadoff hitter, is that right? Because I'm really a Dodger fan, but I'm feeling the Braves right now, and they've got one of the best leadoff hitters in history. So I say thank you. I also would like to extend a hearty thank you to my friend Dwight, the head of the library system, and Ms. Trudy, and my friend Ms. Sherry Drayton. I've spoken here many times, and they've always received me warmly. In the audience, I have some other friends that I will be calling out or talking about in a few minutes, but I'm very pleased, and I'm going to tell you why. Yesterday, I was here, and I just said I would come in and look at some of the exhibit, but I was blown away. I'll tell you why soon also. Stony the road we trot, bitter the chastening rod. Gone are the days when hope unborn had died. Yet, with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to a place for which our Father sighs. Raise your hand if you've heard that before. All right. Since this is a class, I'm going to point to a student. Where's that from?
That's from our the song.
Okay, Stevie Wonder, what song?
And I should know this. Lift every voice.
Lift every voice. The so-called Negro. It's okay. This is what happens when you're on game shows. Your mind just like, oh, I knew it. Yes, you did. So some call it the Negro National Anthem, the Black National Anthem. When James Weldon Johnson wrote it, it was actually a poem, and his brother put it into it. My dad, Reverend Herbert L. Williams, better known as Mr. NAACP, Trudy could tell you, I must have heard Stony the Road We Trot at least 500 times before I was 10. I didn't have a clue what he meant, but my dad used to say that. It was his mantra. Well, let me just share this with you. When we talk about civil rights, the books, the schools have squeezed it into the years between 54 and 85 or 84. Some say 55. So I'm going to try to limit it, but some of the people that we're going to be talking about predate civil rights, the modern civil rights, because there was another civil rights movement right after the war, the Civil War. And what I so like about this particular exhibit is that for the first time since I've come back to Georgetown, and I've been back 15 years, they actually highlight local icons, local heroes. Almost all of them I've covered in my books. And when I got here yesterday and I saw pictures of some of these people, I almost was in tears because I just felt that they were never given the credit that they deserve. Yes, we're going to talk about national icons. Yes, we're going to talk about state icon. We're going to talk about Septima Clark and Majeska Simpson and John McCrae. But there's so many people that we have never really given just credit or acknowledgement. And so in my book, Ebony Effects, this is how I phrased it. I said, Aaron, am I too loud? You're good. Okay. I've said I've always found it interesting how the public school system covers the subject of history. More often than not, the curriculum begins with a generic community before branching out to the state, national, and global community. Typically, schools pay little attention to local history. Perhaps the omission has a lot to do with students' cognitive development and their age. Much of it has to do with the way the material is presented. Local history is seldom revisited in middle or high school, so the average sixth grader knows more about the history of her state or his nation than his or her community. Regrettably, in the Black community, this information is even more limited. Black history is passively presented during the shortest month of the year. Teachers are unable or unwilling to cover the material in depth, considering all of the stress that they're under to meet state and federal standards. Most teachers have neither the time nor the luxury of diving deeply into the pool of Black history. You can no more separate Black history from American history than you can separate water from the ocean. They are one and the same. They are flip sides of the same coin. So when we talk about history, many people call me a historian, and they preface it with the adjective, he's a local historian, which I am. But I know a great deal about other states and other countries as well. So I do not limit myself to that. But today I'm going to be talking about local heroes. One of them I've invited, and she may show up because I have an article that's currently in Gab News and online tabloid. It'll probably be on my Facebook soon, about something she told me that happened in the 60s. We're going to share that. But I'd like to start out with this. Imagine being locked in the bowels of a slave ship with chains wrapped around your ankles, your arms, and your neck, crammed like sardines in a floating can, waiting in a cesspool of rotting flesh, and choking from the suffocating stench of vomit, feces, and sweat. Imagine sitting in the dark 23 hours a day, every day for 8 weeks, fearful of the roving rats that share your voyage, but not your bondage. Dizzy from the motion of an ocean filled with your ancestors' bones, weary from watching their bodies thrown overboard, and teary from hearing your father's cries and your mother's moans. Imagine arriving in a strange world where strange people strip you of your language, your religion, your culture, your land, and your identity. Picture kings and queens and warriors working on chain gangs from sun up to sundown, clearing the land and grading the ground for 300 years, planting crops that they cannot share in, building houses they cannot live in, and creating wealth for a nation that doesn't even know their name. Imagine pretending that your master is kind because he teaches you his favorite scripture, slave, obey thy master. Or he tells you that your earthly servitude to him is going to get you into a colored heaven. Imagine not being able to read and write or go anywhere but your master and his children and his children's children freely traveled the world, accumulating houses, money, and land. Imagine governing your tongue and disciplining your disappointments, having to smile when you wish to cry, and having to laugh when there ain't a damn thing funny. Picture the pain of being a 50-year-old man, but your name is still boy. Imagine one day overhearing talks. Imagine being so bent up, beat down, and stepped over, as Dr. King used to say, that the impulse to dream has been slowly stripped from you because the cancer of white supremacy has thoroughly sucked away your sense of somebodyness, and you're suffering from a disease called possibility blindness and a condition of, I ain't nobody. Imagine one day overhearing talks of an impending war, rumors of Yankees, and whispers of a thing called freedom, getting a semblance of its sunlight for 30 years before the impenetrable curtains of the black codes snatches it away, before the pain of Plessy versus Ferguson or the reign of the KKK. Picture protesting for your rights in the courts and ballot boxes, peacefully processing a civil unrest, nevertheless having to contend, having your content of character maligned for daring to fight back, being characterized as lazy, lawless, barbaric. Now open your eyes, because you survived. You are the great-granddaughter and the great-great-grandson of royalty, a descendant of 20 million Africans who survived the Middle Passage. Although millions of your ancestors' bones lie at the bottom of the ocean, you made it. When slavery threatened to tear your family apart, your mother and your foremothers stood in the gap for you. When their husbands and their fathers and their brothers were snatched from them and sold up the river, they were the glue that cemented your fractured family. Even as their drunken masters used and abused them, the content of their character was not going to leave them. And so they would take it to their graves, these women, rather than face the wrath of raising an unfathered family. Now, in their golden years, your foremothers, when they could have and should have been resting, they were cooking other people's food, washing other people's clothes, and scrubbing other people's floor just to put a little something away from you. So when life began to throw curves at you, you would not strike out. Never forget that your forefathers built Georgetown. I'm going to say it again. Literally built Georgetown. They were laborers without land, workers without wages, and builders without blueprints. When America borrowed from her bank of limited integrity to pay for the expedience of slavery, your forefathers paid the interest on the note. When free labor turned into cheap labor, and it was obvious that America was morally bankrupt because her promissory note of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness was not for your forefathers. But they never stopped depositing hope in the Bank of America. Dreamed they did, and if not for themselves, then for you. America was not only what they believed in God. With this belief, they built hundreds of churches throughout Georgetown. Faith may have been the oil that eased their hard-knock lives, but it was the content of their character that refused to measure their manhood by the size of their paycheck, the length of their members, or the number of babies they could father, rather the families that they can raise. All right? So this is talking about a legacy that goes far beyond 1955. I'm going to give you the first profile that I have about a gentleman who was raised probably within 5 or 10 miles from here. His name is Mr. William Green Sr. And I like his story, and I think it's very apropos for this civil rights exhibit. Some of you may know him. His grandson is my barber. I don't see him as much as I should, but he's my barber. Here we go. This is from my book, 24 Extraordinary People Who Made a Difference. Voting only takes minutes. It's a true story. All of my stories are true. Voting only takes a minute but the right to vote took decades of sacrifice. When William Green Sr. was young, there used to be a literacy test to help keep people from voting. It was started in Mississippi between 1890 and 1910. The Southern states rewrote the Constitution to circumvent the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed the right to vote. Now, regardless of your race, your color, and previous conditions of servitude, we were given the right to vote. You hear so much about Amendment 14, but this is 15. By the way, what goes around comes around. Here we are. All right. They adopted Jim Crow laws that denied black the right to vote. The powers that be said, before you can vote, you're going to have to do some additional things. Let me just say this. Even though black men was given the right to vote, it was not given to black women until 1920. Not given to women, period. All right. One of those things that was in the literacy test was you had to pass it. But of course, it would be would-be voters could not pass the literacy test because those in charge of administering the test made a mockery of the process with ridiculous, unanswerable questions such as, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? The new law made black men, who had already been voting, take that test also. They couldn't pass the test, of course, because they didn't know, and neither do we, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap. So they were taken off the voting list. Through the 15th Amendment on paper prevented voting discrimination, Southern states routinely denied blacks their constitutional rights. All right? William Green from Santee or Sampit was a bright young man. While growing up, he knew something was terribly wrong with the practice, and he vowed to do something about it. He decided to live his life in making a difference. When Glennie Pouchet, we're going to be talking about him, founded the first chapter of the NAACP back in 1939, Green was among the first to join, working tirelessly to help. Now, in the late 30s, as a longtime advocate of voting rights, he assumed the leadership role in the community to help others successfully learn the reading process in order to pass the test. All right? During this era, blacks had to read arbitrarily selected portions of the Constitution. Today, I couldn't even read all of it. All right? And they were given the most difficult question, while poor whites were given easy questions like, what is your address? All right? So over 15 years, Green was a member of the election committee, and he worked tirelessly to help people get their voter registration card, teaching them, spending his own time. He had his own family, but he did all that he could about it. And just in case you think that William Green Sr. did not jeopardize the safety of his family and his life by helping blacks vote in the 1930s all the way through the 1960s, let me share with you a story about another civil rights leader from Mississippi who did the same thing. His name was Vernon I'm mispronouncing it, Demire. He was the president of the local chapter in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Now, on January the 10th, 1966, his home was attacked by the KKK. His family woke up to the sound of a shotgun and the sound of gas jugs being thrown through the window. Demire grabbed his children, but his house erupted into fire. They escaped with their lives, but Demire was seriously burned. Before he died, he told a local reporter, I have been active in trying to get people to register to vote. People who don't vote are deadbeats to the state. Like Demire, Green was never without a voting registration form, which he carried with him, ever ready to sign a prospective voter. He was never without an NAACP card. And his mantra was, if we vote, we can make a difference. William Green is a local civil rights hero who has never really gotten all of the credit that he deserved, but he dedicated his life to helping this community and helping people. So, I'm going to tell you about another gentleman who was born in 1858. And he's not out there. but I'm hoping after the day, Cherie, he will be. His name was William Albert Sinclair. William Albert Sinclair was born in Georgetown in 1858. His family split up just before the war, and after the war, they were able to reunite. And just as things were getting better for he and his mother and his family, a hate mob lynched his father. Little William learned that his father's lynching, and he was determined to do something about it. I preface this by a quote from Edmund Burke, an Irish poet writer, who said, "All that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." Little Williams wanted to do something, but he didn't know what he can do, being a little black boy, being raised in the 1860s and 70s. His mother did everything she could to provide for him, but the family struggled. In 1865, like other formerly enslaved people, his mother could have been happy with the fact that he was free, but she wanted more for him, so much more. So when the newly established Freedmen Bureau created schools for blacks, William's mother challenged him to be the best student that he can be. She worked several jobs to provide for him, and before long, her fortitude began to pay off. His grades were so good that he was able to get into Clafton College in Orangeburg. And in Clafton, he dreamed of becoming a teacher, a minister, or even a doctor, all of the things that he could not have done 10 years before this. But unbeknownst to him, in 1873, after the radical Republican legislators opened the University of South Carolina doors to blacks, and when they say radical Republicans, they're talking about black Republicans, not today's Republican, even though they're radical. All right. William was fortunate to be among the first African Americans to attend. Now, his fortune was really looking bright in his future, and his dreams were becoming somebody was on the horizon. But unbeknownst to little William, his good fortune was coming to an end, because in 1877, when the Union Army suddenly left the South, white legislators quickly moved to bar blacks from attending the University of South Carolina. By the way, you heard Dr. Turner talk about James Boley, the first person that Harriet Tubman freed when he was 6 years old, and his mother. He came back to Georgetown and became all of those things. But one of the things I like about it, he became a trustee at the University of South Carolina and literally opened the doors. It only lasted for 4 years. But like I said, from 73 to 77, blacks and other minorities were able to go to the University of South Carolina. But after the Northern Army left, things quickly changed. Despite his sorrow, he was forced, along with everyone else, to leave South Carolina University, and he was crushed. He would discipline his disappointments, though, by remembering how his dad died, and everything his mother had sacrificed for him. Somehow he was able to continue his education at Howard University, and from there he later applied to be the prestigious Andover Theological Seminary, earning his second degree. For the next 6 years, he traveled the world writing books, lecturing on race relationships, and doing missionary work. But he didn't rest on his laurels. With the help of a philanthropic, a rich person, he was to attend the Meharry Medical College of Nashville, Tennessee. That hospital is still there. Classes were challenging, but he was equal to the challenge. Now, he had not one, not two, not three, but 4 degrees. A little black boy from Georgetown, born enslaved. You can do your will if you want to. By now, Dr. William Sinclair had indeed become somebody. Remember, the quote was, "All that was necessary for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing." He became somebody, but he never forgot where he came from. He remembered what his mother said. She said, "Son, first you learn, then you earn, but then you return to your community and pay it back, pay it forward." That summer, William gave back to his community by becoming a teacher at Livingston College, an all-black school in Salisbury, North Carolina. During his breaks, he returned to Georgetown, becoming the principal of one of the grade schools. My mother had to tell me this. If you're younger than me, you probably don't know that school did not exist for 9 or 10 months the way it is now. It was 4 months. Anybody know why? Cotton and tobacco and rice and everything else. Somebody had to work the field. If you look at many of these icons out there, like Sam Ragg and some of the others who are not out there, they had so many siblings that you can start an army, at least a basketball team. Sam had 12 other siblings. And I asked myself why. The more arms and legs, the more help you had with your farm. There was no Walmart, no Amazon. You had to grow your own food, all right? Which is probably why Carver's Bay does so well. These are some big guys, you know. Oh, my Lord. What are they eating? All right. After several meetings, okay, here's the twist. William was appalled in the summer of that same year in Springfield, Illinois, the home of the President Abraham Lincoln. White mob raged against the black community for days, killing, wounding, and driving thousands of black residents out the city. Appalled at the senseless violence, a group of white liberals led by a lady named Mary White Ovington issued a call for a national conference to address the escalating racial violence in America. As I say, what goes around comes around. She challenged good men and women everywhere to do something about it. Guess who was the first one to answer her call? William Albert Sinclair. Now, after several meetings, the organization grew to become the National Association for the Advancements of Colored People, as my dad would say, the NAACP. As an original member of the executive branch, Dr. Sinclair was appointed to the Board of Trustees, and he served there for many years. He was also one of the editors of their national magazine called The Crisis. Now, in addition to his work with the NAACP, Dr. Sinclair was the financial secretary at Howard University. And before he died, in 1926, he was widely credited as the man responsible for helping Dr. Mordecai Johnson become Howard University's first black president. Despite his humble beginnings, William Albert Sinclair of Georgetown accepted a mother challenge to be somebody. He turned his tragedy into triumph and made life better for millions of people. I want to take this moment before I get to the next profile to talk about, and by the way, in 1993, Joseph Haynes Rainey Park was dedicated, that's the park on Front Street where the sculpture is, was dedicated to Joseph Haynes Rainey. And what I remember, because I was on the program, I had done a poem, Congressman James Clyburn said this, and I never will forget it. He said, it doesn't take away from me or you to celebrate someone else's achievements and accomplishments. It does not take away from me celebrating Rosh Hashanah or Columbus Day or whatever, because that is what the blanket or the tapestry of America is about. So when I say things about black history, it doesn't take away anybody else's history. All it does is highlight our history, the greatest history that's never been told. So, my dad, for many, many years, did what he could to help his community. And that is often a very thankless thing. He met a fellow by the name, Trudy knows, and several of you know, a fellow by the name of Joyner, Dr. Joyner from Coastal. He used to be at Duke and several other schools. They were on the March of Washington in 1963 with Dr. King, I Have a Dream speech. And there were literally thousands of people, I think 100,000. And they were singing songs as they got off the bus, and there was a rally, and they started singing a parody of that song, Amen, Amen. And somebody would say, Mississippi wants freedom, and then the chorus would join in. And then somebody would say, North Carolina wants freedom. Well, unbeknownst to my dad and Dr. Joyner, what was his first name? Charles Joyner. Okay, get him mixed up with Tom Joyner. All right. They did not know each other at the time. It was 1963. I'm a little boy. But they both had it in their mind that the next opportunity is like double just. When I can jump in, I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to talk about my state. I'm going to talk about South Carolina. So at the same time, at the same moment, with the same song, as if they had rehearsed it, they both yelled out, they bellowed, "South Carolina wants freedom." Now, I'm telling you this not because they were singers, they were, but they became lifelong friends. Dr. Joyner, as far as I'm concerned, his books was the first books that I ever read about the history of blacks in Georgetown that humanized blacks, that talked about their family, their marriages, their wives. I have read so many books, which is why I did Ebony Effects, hearing about the negativity about blacks, black Republicans, radical Republicans, ignorant savages, and all of that. And I said to them, and then it was so much about antebellum mansions and houses and all of that. And I'm saying, I'm going crazy with this. So I said, do we have anything we can be proud of? Dr. Joyner book, and he became a good friend of my dad, and he wrote about it. He talked about Gullah. This is before Gullah celebrated now, but back then they thought it was ignorant gibbery, all right? And so he's a hero of mine. Just before he died, he gave me a blurb on the back of my book. And I say all of that because during the heyday of the NAACP, one of the people that was with my dad going to Columbia many times is still here. And there's an old saying, it takes longer to rust out than to wear out. But she is doing well, looking good, feeling good, and smelling good. Her name is Miss Viola Holmgreen. Let's give her a hand, please. All right. I'm going to read this letter. We talk about things that happened so many years ago, but something happened to me a few weeks ago. Some history was laid on my doorstep. I was at a building on High Market Street in Georgetown. Is she here, Charlene? She's not here. Okay. This is Charlene Brave Johnson. Some of you may know her. Remember I was talking about families with 12 people? She had a big family. They're still living, many of them. So I'm at a meeting at this building on High Market Street about a month ago, maybe a little more. I was invited to attend. It was a luncheon on health registration. This is October. Many people have a chance to either sign up or change their health policies. So I was there, and they were giving me lunch, and one of the gentlemen sitting across from me, I won't nominate him, he said, "Steve." I said, "Yeah. I bet you know the history of this building." I said, "No, I don't." But just at that time, I couldn't talk because one of the speakers, there were many agencies speaking, so I didn't want to be rude. And then, he asked me that during the break. Then she went to speaking again, and before I know it, this guy had left. But his question sounded more like a declaration. I bet you know. People think when you're a historian, you know everything. I don't. But I was interested. This building is still in existence today. And then the lady who bought it, a very young woman, if you go to Gab News, you'll see the article. Her name is Ebony Hughes. Some of you may know her. She's an insurance broker. She's many things. She's a Jane of all trades. But a lovely young lady. To be so young, I'm just incredibly impressed with her. She purchased the building, and she didn't know the history. But she said, "Steve, I'm going to direct you to somebody who does." She directed me to Morris Johnson, and he and I sat down for an hour. Another civil rights icon, hero, unsung hero. And she directed me to this lovely lady, Charlene Brave. This is the story. Oh, this is not the story. All right. I recently attended a luncheon in Georgetown with 15 or more others. With October being the annual enrollment month for health agencies, we listened attentively to various presentations from different agencies. During the break, one of the presentations asked me if I knew the history of the building, and I told him I did not. But something about his question piqued my interest because it sounded more like a declaration. You know, don't you? The break was over, and I never got a chance to learn the history of the building. But after talking with him and some other people, I discovered that the building was built back in 1953. The facility was used primarily to treat employees from the International Paper Company, biggest employee in Georgetown. For more than 30 years, the spacious offices treated their employees and many other people, including blacks. But by all accounts, during that period known as separate but equal, you all know about that, the treatment of black patients was not separate and never equal or fair. Charlena said, I shall never, she was a girl at the time this happened. This happened in 1964, I believe she told me. I shall never forget how they treated me, said Charlena, who's now 74 years old. Charlena was raised in a very devout Christian family with 12 siblings. I know her family. They are very serious about their faith. My father, said Charlena, believed in paying his bills and paying his tithes. He was a hardworking man who loved his kids. We were raised with Christian values and taught to love and respect everyone. Like most children, she and her siblings occasionally got sick and visited the doctor's office. Now, when we got to the doctor, she said, we were always the last to be treated. Sometime we'd get there in the morning, we wouldn't even see a doctor until almost closing time. That's just the way it was for us, she said. Now, on one hot summer day, her father instructed her older sister and she to go to the doctor's office to pay a bill and bring back the receipt. Charlena was in the 10th grade at the time and her sister had already graduated. Together, they walked to the doctor's office, something they have done many times. But for some reason, this time, they decided they were not going to go into the office colored door. In the 1960s, Georgetown, like every other Southern town, was thoroughly segregated, and America was on the precipice of exploding like a powder cake because millions of people were protesting for their civil rights. Looking back on it, said Charlena, we did not plan it, we just did it. Maybe it was the murder of Medgar Evers and Malcolm X that motivated them. Maybe it was the brutal beating of protesters in Selma, Alabama, or the bombing of 4 little black girls in a Birmingham church. Maybe it was the spirit of Rosa Parks refusing to relinquish her seat to a man, or the courage of Jane Pittman, who dared to drink from a white-only water fountain. Whatever the motivation, they walked into the doctor's office that day through the white-only door. But no sooner did they step foot in the door, the receptionist started screaming obscenities at them. You don't belong in here, she bellowed. Well, we just come here to pay our daddy's bill, they replied. I don't care what you're here for. You don't belong in here. Now you get the hell out of here. During the humiliating words, a funny thing happened, said Charlena. I like this part. It wasn't her cussing at us or calling us everything but a child of God that caught my attention. I was fixated on how nice their waiting room looked. All these years of going to the doctor's office, I'd never dreamed how nice the other side was. Oh my goodness, the walls were brightly colored with beautiful pictures on them. The chairs were plush, the tables were stacked with magazines, and there was not one but 2 bathrooms, all right? In the colored place, we had 1 bathroom, and it was dark and dingy, and there was one examination room, and 1 bathroom, and a sliding glass window where the nurse would rudely speak to us. But despite the onslaught of insults hurled at them, Charlena and her sister insisted that they were going to stay there until we paid my daddy's bill. The receptionist called the police. A few minutes later, a black policeman showed up and escorted them to his car and drove them home. And when he arrived, he explained to their daddy what had occurred in the doctor's office. After listening, their father asked them two questions. Did she put her hands on you? They said, no, Daddy, she just cussed at us. Did you pay the bill? Yes, Daddy. And here's the receipt he threw at us. After he got the answers to those questions, he turned to the policeman and said, my daughters did the right thing. I taught them to be respectful to others, and as far as I'm concerned, it's all over now, and you can leave my house. That day, Charlena Brave and her sister, Heroics, never made the nightly news or the local newspaper. It was never written in any history books, but that day, they stood up for their rights to be treated fairly. Here we are 60 years later. The old building brought back painful memories of what it represented to Charlena back in the 1960s, but it was tempered with the joy of what it represents today. So you say, Steve, what does it represent today? You got to go on Gab News and read the rest of it. Shameless plug. I will help you with that, though. It's going to become something called a resiliency center. Every city in America, almost every city, are preparing for that. Now, you want to know what that is? You got to look it up. All right. All right, just a few more. I want to talk about a very famous case. Well, it's not that famous, but it's one of them. And it has to do with this fella, Glennie Pouchet. It has to do with him tangentially. It's not directly to him, but he was involved. He was in the court that day. The year was 1944. Might need your help, Dan. Oh, I got it. I want to come to him. One more. There you go. It's not the best picture of him. His name is Glennie Pouchet. One of the issues dear to Pouchet's heart was education. In the 1930s, black teachers were paid only half of what white teachers were paid for the same work. And despite being equally qualified, so Glennie Pouchet joined the prominent NAACP leader John McCrae, Ozzie McCain, and Majeska Simpkins. Each of them, all of them are out there. Their pictures. Simpkins in urging state leaders of the NAACP to make teacher pay the organization's top priority. Now, let me have your minds pretend that this is a courtroom and pretend it's 1944. Viola DeVal of Charleston was considered to be ideal for this particular case. As a Howard University graduate, she had the requisite academic background. In 1944, DeVal had earned the highest teaching certificate possible and was the best paid educator among her African-American cohorts. She earned $645 a year, which was good money back then, but it's all relative. While the lowest paid white teacher doing the same job earned $1,100 that year. When she was recruited by the NAACP to be the test case for equal pay for black teachers, she bravely took up the mantle as their third plaintiff, but as the trial date drew closer, she got nervous. I should tell you, because it's not in here, the first test case was a man and something happened there. The second one was a woman, and she did a cardinal thing. She decided she's gonna get pregnant, all right? Back then, if you were pregnant, you couldn't teach, all right? So they got Viola, all right? Now, Viola got nervous as they got closer to the date. As a result, the NAACP asked John McCrae of Columbia, a civil rights activist who to me never got the credit he deserved, to visit DeVal to help her keep it together emotionally. McCray made several trips to Charleston, where she lived, to help her and her mother calm her down. Now, some of you know, most of you, I think almost all of you know about the famous Brown versus Board of Ed decision back in 1954. What you should know, I was Saturday with a friend of mine, Mr. Felder, who is a retired educator and writer, and he actually was one of the person who was carrying John F. Kennedy casket when they buried him. But he told me something that really warmed my spirit Saturday. He said that he and several other prominent people, professors, are going to change, trying to change, get legislation to change the so-called Brown Board of Ed versus Topeka, Kansas. Why, Steve? Well, I found this out maybe 10 years ago, that it was misnamed. It's a misnomer. Kansas had some segregation, but nothing like South Carolina. If you know anything about South Carolina history, that whole case started in Clarendon County, and then it was joined with 4 other counties from around the country. But if you know anything else about South Carolina, the ships came to South Carolina, so the abundance of enslaved people were here in South Carolina long before they got to the mid-country in Kansas. For some reason, they named it after Kansas City. No, it should be named after South Carolina. It's one of the most famous cases ever, and we never got the credit for it. We suffered for it, though, and they're trying to change that. Now, there's 2 more famous people in here. Viola DeVal said she told McCray that her friends at Burke High School, that's down in Charleston, had stopped having anything to do with her. Some hated her for allegedly stirring up trouble. Where we heard that before? You're a troublemaker. John said, good, get into good trouble, right? All right, stirring up trouble between the races. Others shunned her for jeopardizing their job. Let me tell you something, and I mean this. When we were enslaved, there was a significant amount of blacks that didn't want to come out of that. They just didn't. Front said, we identify with the known that we know against the unknown that we don't know. You ever watch that show, Let's Make a Deal? And they win one of those prizes, and then at the end they say, well, you know what, you got a $3,000 prize. Would you like to take a chance on door number 1, door number 2, door number 3? I don't think so. I got 3,000, but no, it could be 30,000. I don't think so. A lot of people are like that, and they go to church. You say, where's your faith? Well, I got kids to feed, you know. So, the high risk of repercussions certainly made black teachers concerned understandable. They were scared. I mean, we didn't have a lot of options. The average, let me tell you something. Some of you are old enough to know this. If you were a black woman, there were very few, almost 0 options. If you had money, you can go to Allen, you can go to State, you can go to Clapper, you can go. But if there was no affirmative, there's nothing. But if you didn't do that, you were a domestic. You'd have to go up north, as my dad would say. My mother did, just to make a decent living. That's why I don't have problems with people coming here from various other countries and they're saying, how could you? They have to live. All right, don't get political, Steve. All right. The high risk of repercussions certainly made black teachers concerned. Fighting for equal pay posed a significant risk to them. Their jobs were not guaranteed, not the way it is now, and they were largely at the superintendent's and the school board mercy. Now, on Valentine's Day, 1944, Chief Counsel Thurgood Marshall came to South Carolina to prosecute this case. It was his first time, not only in South Carolina, but in the South. He's legendary, he's famous for winning a whole lot of cases around the country, but he had never experienced anything like South Carolina. All right? On this day the trial began, he walked into the courtroom in Charleston with John McCray. And right next to John McCray was Lenny Pouchet. It's pronounced Pouchet. And the courtroom was also, well, I said that. The defense lawyer for Charleston County Board was an attorney named Mr. Ehrlich. And Marshall and his associates were sitting at another table. Behind them, Duval, she was there with her hand shaking that her mother had to hold her. The court, now she was young now. The courtroom was packed that you could overhear comments like, God, I sure feel sorry for that girl. I sure don't want to see that child hurt, but she should have known better. That's what people say. You know, in the wilderness, they told Moses and Aaron, we were better off in slavery. We had 3 meals, you know. People will do it. You have to pay a price for this. The judge came in and sat down in a swivel chair. He smiled, then he turned his back to Marshall, Thurgood Marshall. And he said, Mr. Ehrlich, when was that case decided in Maryland, the Donald Murray case? Marshall jumped up behind the judge and started to answer, I know. The judge said, Mr. Marshall, I didn't ask you. Sit down. The courtroom was in a buzz. McCrae overheard another woman say, see there, he won't even let the lawyer talk. He won't let that child law talk. Poor thing. Ehrlich found another record and he was looking for, and he gave the judge the answer. Then, smiling, the judge asked Ehrlich another question. He said, without looking, I don't know what the question was, but whatever the question was, again, Thurgood Marshall jumped up and tried to give the answer. And very didactically, meanly, judge said, Mr. Marshall, I didn't ask you, sit down. McCrae and Marshall didn't know what was going on. They looked at each other in bewilderment. The judge asked the defense about 4 more questions and then swung his chair around to face the plaintiff, Marshall. Now, Mr. Marshall, he said, I don't want you to think that I was being rude to you by letting you give these answers. I know you know the answer to those cases because you were the chief counsel of the cases. This is a very simple case. But what I wanted to find out from the school board was how long it had known that they were supposed to pay Negroes the same equal salary as they paid everyone else. There's no need to take this court's time. Now that what I want to know from you, Mr. Marshall, is how do you want me to prepare the order? Do you want me to immediately equalize the salary? Do you want me to give the school board some time to get ready for equalization? Or do you want it to be retroactive order that would make the school board go back all of those years and pay these poor teachers what they deserve? I'm telling this story because this is the same judge. There's something in the Bible called God has a ram. God always has a ram. My mother used to say that all the time, in the bush. This was Judge Waring. Is it Waring or Waring? I get it mixed up. I think it's Waring. He was a good old Southern boy, proud one. But he became a judge and he began to realize injustice. As Dr. King said, injustice here is injustice everywhere. And he was the one that encouraged Thurgood Marshall, who had been winning cases all over the country. He had the big head. I'm Thurgood Marshall. But he came, this is 1944. In 1950, he came back. Marshall came back to Waring's court in Charleston, or he might have been in Columbia at that time. And Judge Waring said, I don't want you to do any more separate but equal cases. I want you to go for the whole ball of wax. Marshall said, we're not ready for that. We're not ready for that. He said, you're ready. And the moral of the story is that's how he won the Brown versus Board of Ed case, which desegregated the schools, and then after that, the dominoes started to fall. All right? I'm going to leave you with a poem, as I think I've been running my mouth enough, and I want to give you some Q&A. I'm going to leave you with a poem that I wrote. I could talk about James Prelo, who went in 1944 to the convention for the black delegate, but I'll save that. And if you are interested in my book, you can read it. By the way, you don't have to buy it from me. The library has every one of my books, except 2. So you can get it, okay? There's a poem that I like called Unsung Heroes. And this is how it goes. This is for the unsung heroes who gave their blood, sweat, and tears down through the years. This is for those, oh Lord. I'm having a junior moment. Let me know when I get to senior. I haven't done this in a minute, but it's so apropos to what's going on now. It really is. It's called Unsung Heroes. This is for the unsung heroes, for those who gave their blood, sweat, and tears down through the years, yet whose story was never told. Here's for their unsung work after the celebration was over, but the struggle has not quite started. Here is the work that they never received for all of the work that they have done, but the credit not started. Though it is not enough. Oh, I got to get this. I'm sorry. I'm stepping all over it. Give me a minute, please. Unsung heroes. I actually wrote this for my dad many years ago before he passed, and he liked it. Dan, help me, my eyes are hurting me. Do you see unsung heroes here?
Unsung Heroes 134.
134? Okay, thank you. All right, let's hear it. Let's close it with this. This one is for the unsung heroes who were unbought and unsold, who gave their blood, sweat, and tears down through the years, yet whose story has never been told. This is for their unsung work after the celebration was over, but the struggle has not quite started. Here is the credit they never received for all of the values that they once guarded. Though it is not enough for the many years they have given or the pain that was driven by the harvest that they have reaped, but there simply can never be a tribute of alloy, metal, or gold that can repay them for a job well done and a spirit that ran so deep. But we humbly say thank you, or we are for sure a few generations late, but we will not renege on their deeds because we are committed by our faith. Listen to me now. While the world looked at Martin and Malcolm X pondering the question, who would be next, there was no mention of them as if they acted alone. There was no mention of the sacrifices that they made, nor the lives that were saved, or the tremendous courage that these people shown. So this poem is for them, for those who marched in back of the crowd behind the scene where there was no exposure, no cameras or press, no film at 11 or stairway to heaven, but still they have given us their very best. Why? Because God uses ordinary people, and at the very least, you were just a plain old ordinary guy, but oh, how you tried to right the wrong that plagued our life. You protested with your sit-ins and your boycotts. Sometimes there was violence and sometimes there was not. When you turned the other cheek, you found out that it hurt just the same. Some of you were beaten over the head and even some of you are dead, but your dying was not in vain. It was you that said, we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. You have made this world a better place for all races to live in, but still, you do not wear a crown. You know why? You are an unsung hero, and the moral arc of justice is long. Oh, there was much need for plotting and planning, marching and standing. There was much need to be strong. Though we hate to look back, it was you that took us from Negro to black. As you cried out, we shall overcome. But if somehow we overcame, it is shown up for shame. How soon we forget our history that made it so. How soon we forgive the people that helped us. Far too many people, these unsung heroes that too many of us simply do not know. Thank you. I want to thank you. This whole exhibit is about unsung heroes. Some of them are sung, but in Georgetown, many of them are not sung. And so I'm telling everybody that I know, come here and see this. Yes, it's a little off the beaten path, but it's worth it. I am very pleased to know that you parents, and many of you are grandparents, and some of you are even great-grandparents, are teaching your kids history. Why? Because rather than curse the darkness, we can light a candle. Rather than complain why the schools are not teaching this and not teaching that, that's not really their job. It's the job of the parents to teach their children. Native Americans don't wait for their children to say, oh, you know who discovered America? Columbus. And the parents say, oh, really? Where you get that from? People who experienced the horrors of Hitler, They don't wait for their children to learn the Holocaust in school. They teach them that. The problem with us is we too busy watching TV and all that other stuff. Not you, but we need to teach our kids. That's why I went out of my way to get that sculpture to come here. Before then, I didn't have white hair. Just kidding. I can't say that my church members do. But we made it happen. And Dr. Dan left off one person who's integral, very important person. I call him my brother from another mother because he's of another persuasion, but I love him. His name is Mr. Kent Humes, and he helped with that as well. History is meaningful, it's important, and it's never been more important because some of the rights that we thought were solid, like Roe versus Wade, you know what I'm saying? So there it is. Any questions? Okay. Well, don't be afraid. I won't bite.
Steve, could you say something about your dad's role in the movement?
Thank you. I don't like to talk about my dad when I'm talking about other greats because people think, well, you're playing favorites. But like most of you, I love my dad. He was a drum major. He was always the type of person that taught us to be respectful. When we went to the store and we were disrespected as children, he would always say, if they don't respect you, don't go back there and spend your money. If they don't give you a bag for what you did, because they can say you stole it, so put it back. There's teachable moments almost every minute of the day. And so my dad was one of those persons. I can remember being a little boy. I told you he used to say Stony the road, and I'm like, what road? And then he would point at a TV, Steve. I said, yeah, Daddy, that's Jackie Robinson. That's Marion Motley. That's Willie Mays. I'm like, okay, but I learned at an early age who these people were. And my dad was like that. He was just he never played a sport in his life, but he celebrated this. And there's another thing. I just did an interview for Georgetown, Trudy, for Georgetown Museum. They were doing a documentary on what it was like to go to school at Wynyard or Howard. I came here in '68 and I was in high school. And so I think she was shocked, Trudy. My experience was not like others. And then I told my sister that, and she said, well, you were raised in a multicultural, multiracial city. And so when you came here, you didn't do what I saw some of my friends do. Stand up a minute, Dan. This was so ingrained over the years. When they were talking, they wouldn't look you in the eye, okay? Thank you. There were other things that's just leftover vestige. Just like if it rains tonight, the vestiges, the water will still be on the ground. So there's a lot of people to this day don't like to go to Front Street, and they tell me, oh no, back in the day they did this to me, they did that. Well, that was back in the day. So my experience at Wynyard was different. Were there racial issues? Sure, but I didn't experience it the same way others did. So my dad, to get back to him, was a person that tried to help other people. And since I came back here 15 years ago, many, many people had asked me, well, Steve, it's in your blood. Why don't you do the NAACP? I said, I don't have the same nerves that my dad had. I call a spade, you know. And if you get my dad mad enough, he would too. But it's a thankless job. I know for sure he helped, I'm not gonna nominate her, but he helped a friend of mine, sister, get a position at First Citizens Bank in Georgetown. I must have asked her 20 times, and she, no, I don't remember your dad, you see. Well, you do what you can, all right? So sometimes they're gonna thank you, some not. I have plenty of other people, when I mention my dad, oh, that's your dad, he helped me get my first job at KFC. I said, Daddy was like that. He was the type that would try to help. Cliff Jones, he passed a year or so ago. He worked for the International Paper Company. He said Daddy tried to help him. That's all we can do, just do the best we can.
Steve?
Yes.
We're all packed up right now because of the renovation, but
Yeah.
I still have a list of books
Some we had, and some we had that couldn't be checked out. I mean, period, because they were first editions or they were irreplaceable.
Yeah.
But he would come in and use those. We would interlibrary loan books, and he was always reading, always researching, and I kept that core list that he depended on. But everything that you said, absolutely, I can attest to. Very, very accurate.
So are you saying he was a chip off the old block?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Emma, thank you, Trudy, for sharing that. My dad remarried. My mother died in high school. My dad remarried. And his wife, was from the Florence area, Hannah Pamplico. And she had this joke. My dad's first name was Herbert. She called him Hubbard. She said, Stevie, if you want somebody to write a sentence or a book for you, your dad is the one, but I can't get him to do anything else. He ain't no good, and I'm the same way, Trudy. I don't fix a thing. I just fix my dinner. That's about it. But she said, I can't get him to do nothing. He was more cerebral, let me put it that way. But he loved his kids. Anybody? Yes.
The name of the poem, was that Unsung Hero?
Unsung Hero.
From what book is that?
That if you don't push, nothing moves. This, actually, y'all, was my first book. I was living in another state, and it's about 80% poetry and 20% prose or short stories. But I still use a lot of it, especially when I'm talking to kids. You have to add a little theater when you're dealing with kids. And so I talk about, there's some poems here that I love doing, if I can remember them. All right. Anybody else?
I do.
Yes, sir.
I see on the printout you have from 1955.
What's that? Oh, yes. The opening of the modern civil rights.
Oh, okay. But you don't know history from beyond that.
Well, I had to stop somewhere because I was working with that book. One of the fellows who's in the book is a football player. Many of you guys know Irvin Blueprint Parker. And he came, I think, into the NFL in '84. So I said, well, this would be a good place to stop because civil rights never officially stopped. They just kind of faded out and what have you. So, I mean, otherwise I'd still be doing the book, you know. Yes, sir.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
The presentation was excellent.
Thank you.
I guess why I asked that is because
Yes, sir.
I know I could remember the first black policeman that was hired in Georgetown.
Yes.
Matter of
What's
fact,
his name?
His wife was my first grade teacher,
Okay.
Aretha Ann Myers.
He's in my book, yeah, the names. A lot of these names, I've never met these people, but I've seen the names. When I was researching Ebony Effects, I must have asked everybody. One of my neighbors is Margaretta Knox. She passed away a couple of years ago, but she was invaluable for helping me. And then there's another fellow who is one of my good friends, still living, James Rags. Some of you may know James. There's a lot of people who are still among us. That's why Bunny Rodriguez passed away. That's why I say we have to get it in writing, because when they go, they take it with them. They take it with them. And they know it. It's just that, I don't know, they have some trepidation about writing it down. I love writing. I do. Yeah. All right.
When you went to high school, it say in here that 1970 was desegregated, so is that before 70?
I started in '68, and by '70 they were integrating.
So it was happening when you were in school, or when
Yes,
you remember?
the last 2 years of my school. And I was kind of happy because, you know, there was a shortage of girls, and I liked having more girls. You know? I wore younger man clothes then. I had no stomach. I was doing all right, you know. Yeah, and then they asked me how was my experience at Wynyard when I said it wasn't a big problem. When I first got to Wynyard, there were only 16 or 17 blacks. But for the most part, it was. They said, but did they sit together? I said, no, they don't do that now. You can go to a basketball game now, and the people are separated by their choice. By their choice. Some of the nicest people I met was at Wynyard. Now, I did have a few issues, but you're going to have that anywhere. Comes with the territory. All right, y'all don't want to go. Well, just so you know, like I say, you don't have to. My most expensive book is $18. Well, actually, they just went up on the price. that 24 extraordinary people. I do want to say something about that because these are local people as well. And I want you to know their story. In terms of pure history, this one is probably the most comprehensive. I wrote this in 2012, and it covers soup to nuts. It covers Africa all the way up to 2012. And some of these are heroes that I have a very, very high opinion of. But this book I wrote a few years ago, and it's called 24 Extraordinary People. How many of you, I'm sure most of you, have heard of Modest Squires? Okay. She is primarily responsible for Choppy High School. She had been trying for years, for decades, to get that high school in that rural area. A lot of people don't understand that the bridges that we have now and the roads that we have now were not accessible. Did not exist back then. One of my good friends, Mr. Lewis Morant, who lives in Plantersville, he says, Steve, I learned a great deal about Georgetown history because when I was a boy, we didn't go to Georgetown. And I keep forgetting, that was a trip. That was a trip. Modest Squires had been asking the powers that be for a while to get a school there. In 1957, she finally did. All right. She was also solicited by Governor Riley to help with a program called EIA. I used to be a school administrator and teacher. EIA, Education Improvement Act, which was nationally recognized as one of the best. But he personally asked Modest Squires about it. She was a no-nonsense woman now. No foolishness. But that was the situation at Howard, too. Not like it is. It was no foolishness. You got your education. So she's in here. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because next month, they're dedicating a couple of the buildings that are still there, the complex of Choppy. They're dedicating it to three people, Modest Squires, Josephine Howard, the music teacher, and Mr. Moutry, okay? And that's going to be in the news. I know it because I wrote an article a few years ago about it. And I asked Blue, the football player, I said, I want to follow up on it. That's coming up November the 10th, all right? But you're going to hear about Florence Williams. No relationship, but she was the first to start a hospital, only the third hospital in Georgetown, all right? Because she said God had told her to do it. You got so many people here. You got Charles Ann Button, who's in 1968, she lives in Maryville. She came home, her house was burning. Got shot, not burning, shot a bullet through the window. David Drayton, Joseph Haynes Rainey, Miss Ruby, Ross Sanford. Anybody heard of Ross Sanford? Stafford, I'm sorry, Stafford. See what happens when you make a mistake? They jump all over you. He, as you know, I wasn't even born, he dedicated his property to get that school built. And from my research, he said there were no post office. You had to pick up your mail at a church. And there's so many things that did that community. And he never got any credit for it. He didn't want credit. He just wanted to help his community. It's in here, that story. Huey Walker, same thing. All from the rural area. Some of them are from the city of Georgetown, but a lot. Oh, Nicholas Jerome Holmes, the Browns Ferry Water Company. Came back from the war. He graduated from Choppy, couldn't go any higher, went into the Air Force, and he came back. It grieved his spirit when he found out that his mother was still using pumping wells and no running water. And he said, I've been all over the world. There's running water all over America. Why can't we have it? And it took him several years going to Washington. You're talking about Mr. Washington. He went to Columbia, he went to Washington, he went to Georgetown. And finally, he didn't give up, and they got it done. All right, he and several others. So there's stories in here. Why do I write stories? Why do I say stories? Because our young people need to know that you can do it. You can do it. This one is called The Overcomers, and 32 of my best articles when I used to write for the Georgetown Times, and it's just people who have overcome life's adversity. The sun doesn't shine every day. We're all going to have it. But all of us are self-made. Only the successful people admit it. Those who don't make it in life always blame someone else. It's always somebody else's fault. When you was in the 10th grade, you weren't paying attention, but it's somebody else's fault. Yes, sir.
It's Josephine Howard, my 5th grade teacher.
Is that right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no nonsense. Great musician and singer. She played.
She could play a piano.
Yes, she could. She played for my church, Bethel. There's a story about a church person here, a young person who was blind. Sam Cooke, Aretha Franklin, Huey Walker. There's another friend of mine who teaches dance class, Miss Claudette Morrison. Some of you may dance with her. Just some of the adversities they had to overcome. You know, the march on the march in Birmingham when Dr. King decided he would have children march. And they said, man, you crazy. You're not putting my child in harm's way. But he did, okay? So it's a lot of stuff in here. Richard Allen, about the plague. This is the young lady that has this building that if you go on Gab News, I don't think she's 40. She just bought a building, okay? And she's using it for her community, for health-wise and whatnot. Read it on Gab News, okay? So that's what I do. I tell stories. Here's a gentleman in Georgetown back in the 1800s who was the best shoemaker in the county. Life had tried to belittle him. His name was Thomas Jefferson, not that Thomas Jefferson. But they said he was a very gregarious person, always good for a good conversation, but he was good at what he did, okay? So there's stories. Another young lady is blind. Danny Thomas. Oh my God, I love writing this story. You see the commercial, St. June? I even have a shirt that says, this shirt saved life. He came to America in Detroit way back. And when his wife was in this hospital having a baby, he didn't have money to get her out. Apparently at that time, they weren't letting you or your wife or your child out unless you had money. He prayed, isn't that crazy? He prayed to his patron saint, which is St. Jude, that if he would let my wife come up, and then he did a couple of commercials and he became famous. As a boy growing up, I used to watch his show, No Time for Danny and his daughter, Marla Thomas. There's a lot of good stories about here. I tell kids, the people they see on TV, Beyonce and all these other people, some got talent, some don't. Some got talent, many don't. But you see the glory, you don't know their story. You don't know what they had to go through. All right? Yeah, they're looking good now, but you didn't know. This fella, I'm doing my taxes a few years ago, Doug, and this is near my friend Lamar Fish and Chips in Georgetown. They had a tax thing. This guy flatlined. Flatlined not once, not twice, but 3 times. And there's a guy in here, I'm not gonna mention his name, but you can read it, that gave him, what's it called, CPR? Until the ambulance came, and for some inexplicable reason, it took 30 minutes in Georgetown for the ambulance to come, and everybody in Georgetown knows where Lamar's Fish and Chip is. That's a rare form of stupidity. That's a mystery. But he did it. He did it during the pandemic, where people would say, oh, I ain't touch him. I know I'm a Christian, but God give me sense too, you know. He did it. And his wife was mad at him, but then, you know, he saved this man's life. So I said, I got to put this in this book. Some of y'all know Reverend Evelyn Drayton, head-on collision, in a coma for years. They asked her, I said, did you ever question God? Why me? She said, no. I said, God, why not me? Why can't I be the vessel of your glory? Okay? Janine burned up in a fire. Janine Canteen, I think is her last name, but so stories, I love stories. And then this probably really melted my heart. Anybody know this guy? Anybody ever seen him? No? No. I'm just using this term for poetic meaning. He is what you call a nobody. I don't mean he's not one of God's children, but he doesn't have any credentials. In 1954, he was born with cerebral palsy. Some of you remember back then when you had a child with special needs, they said put him or her away in a sanitarium and they have funny names for it, but his folks decided that they would homeschool him. And fast forward, this is the guy a few years ago before the pandemic was working in McDonald's in Georgetown, sweeping, cleaning. When you drop French fries, he was cleaning it up. When you spilled your, that's him. Anthony is his name. He's a good friend of mine now. When I took him this book, he cried. I wrote that story about 4 or 5 years ago, and when I took him this book, he had the newspaper article on his coffee table, and he was just so happy that I gave him this copy of the book. Now, what endeared me to him was that there's so many people, young people, standing outside and I'm, yeah, hello. And this man's working hard. You see, Dr. King said, if it falls in your lot to be a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper you can be. You ain't got to beg nobody. God will open up doors just because you decide you wanted to be something, to do something. Oh, my God. All right. So that's the books, and I've got more, but they're all in the library. I'm not sure if this one is, Trudy, but every one of them is in the library. And once again, I thank you. I really do. Yeah.